The old Mercy Hospital stood silhouetted against the dying light. Its walls, once white and full of life, were now covered in moss and cracks. The structure looked like a sleeping giant, forgotten by time and people. An ugly spot on the outskirts of town. Locals avoided going near, afraid of the ghost stories and echoes of the past that still resonated in its empty halls. Jagged windows stared like empty eyes. Each broken pane told a story of abandonment and desolation, reflecting the dark and cloudy sky. The wind howled through the broken glass. It was as if the building itself was sighing, remembering the days when it was full of life and hope. It made a low, sad sound, a constant lament that echoed through the empty halls, like an echo of the voices that once filled the place. The iron doors creaked open. The sound echoed in the darkness, adding another layer of mystery and fear to the already unsettling atmosphere. They groaned as if in pain. Every movement seemed like a struggle, as if the building itself was fighting against its inevitable decay. The rusty sign read, Mercy Hospital, founded in 1925. A silent reminder of its long history and the many who passed through its doors. The last patient left in 1985. Since then, the hospital had fallen into oblivion, becoming a haven for shadows and memories. Now, only the shadows lived there. The shadows of a past that refused to disappear, filling every corner with a haunting and melancholic presence. The locals told stories about Mercy Hospital. They whispered about strange happenings. Patients who went in but never came out. Doctors driven mad by unseen forces. Nurses who swore the walls whispered their names. The most disturbing story was about room 302. It was said to be haunted by an evil entity, a former patient who had died violently. Now his tormented soul walked the halls, searching for a comfort he could never find. Tonight, a group of teenagers stood before the gates. They were drawn to the hospital's grim reputation, like moths to a flickering flame. A dare had brought them here, a test of courage. They didn't know it was a journey into terror. The leader, Jake, opened the doors. His hand brushed against the cold metal. He felt a shiver run down his spine. He ignored it. He had to appear brave in front of his friends, especially in front of Sarah. The air inside the hospital was thick and heavy, like every molecule was loaded with untold stories and suffering built up over the years. It smelled of decay and disinfectant, a sickening mix that clung to their skin and clothes, constantly reminding them where they were. Dust motes danced in the beams of their flashlights, creating a hypnotic spectacle that contrasted with the oppressive darkness surrounding them. Each step echoed in the silence, amplifying the sound of their movements and making the hospital seem even more empty and desolate. It was the sound of their own fear, a palpable fear reflected in their faces and the way their hands trembled slightly. They went deeper into the hospital, their hearts pounding as they moved through the dark, shadow-filled hallways. Passing deserted waiting rooms and treatment areas, every corner seemed to tell a story of abandonment and despair. Each room was a snapshot of forgotten pain and suffering, with rusty medical equipment and dust-covered beds. The silence was broken only by their own breathing, a constant reminder of their vulnerability in that inhospitable place, and the beating of their hearts, a constant drumming that echoed in their ears, marking the rhythm of their fear and their determination. Upon reaching the third floor, the temperature dropped. A cold draft seemed to follow them, whispering against their skin. The air became heavy with fear. The feeling of being watched intensified. They arrived at room 302. The door creaked open as if inviting them in. Inside, the air was icy, a cold that chilled them to the bone. A low hum vibrated through the room. The source was unknown, but it felt malevolent. Section 6. The screams begin. Suddenly, a blood-curdling scream echoed throughout the hospital. It came from upstairs, Panic gripped the group. Their blood ran cold. They weren't alone. Jake's eyes scanned the room, searching for the source of the scream. Sarah clung to his arm, her eyes wide with terror. They had to get out. They had to escape the nightmare. Section 7. The entity reveals itself. As they turned to run, a figure flickered in the doorway. A shadowy silhouette, tall and gaunt. Its eyes glowed with an eerie light. The air crackled with energy. The entity was real. The teenagers screamed, their voices hoarse with terror. They stumbled backward, falling over each other in their haste to escape. But the entity moved with unnatural speed, gliding towards them. It was a nightmare come true. Section 8. Trapped. They ran through the hospital, driven by fear, but the entity was always one step ahead. It stalked them through the halls, its laughter echoing behind them. They were trapped in a macabre game of cat and mouse. They reached the main entrance, but the doors wouldn't budge. They were locked. They shook the bars, their cries for help swallowed by the darkness. They were trapped with the entity. Their nightmare had just begun. Section 9. Daybreak's pale light. At dawn, the first rays of sun pierced the darkness of Mercy Hospital. The sunlight, though faint, brought with it a sense of relief, as if the darkness of the previous night was just a bad dream. They illuminated the terrified faces of the teenagers huddled in the main lobby. Their eyes, full of fear and confusion, reflected the intensity of the experience they had just lived through. The entity was gone, vanished with the shadows. The presence that had filled the hospital with an unspeakable terror faded with the coming of day. They stumbled out of the hospital, blinking in the harsh daylight. Each step they took led them further away from the nightmare they had faced. But the weight of what they had experienced remained in their hearts. They never spoke of what they had seen. The silence between them was an unspoken agreement, a way to protect themselves from the horrors they had witnessed. But the memory of that night would haunt their dreams forever. Every time they closed their eyes, the images of the entity and the hospital returned to them, reminding them of the danger they had faced. Mercy Hospital remained abandoned. Its walls, silent witnesses to countless stories of terror, still stood, defying the passage of time, a testament to the darkness that lurked within its walls. Every corner of the hospital seemed to hold a secret, a story of fear and despair, a place where fear was always present. The atmosphere of the hospital, even in daylight, was charged with a sense of unease and danger. Waiting for the next unsuspecting soul to cross its threshold, Mercy Hospital, with its dark history and unsettling presence, remained a place of mystery and terror.